Okay, so today we're going to be learning about the parts of the brain. Say brain with me. Brain. Say, let's read the word brain together. Brain. So we are going to focus on the parts of the brain today and its functions. Say functions with me. Functions. Perfect. So the first area that we're going to talk about, I'm going to sketch our brain. And the very first part of the brain that we're going to focus on is the frontal lobe. Can you say frontal lobe with me? Frontal lobe. So our frontal lobe is right here. And our frontal lobe has some specific jobs. One of the jobs is abstract thinking. Say that with me. Abstract thinking. Let's read the word abstract together. Abstract. Very good. And abstract thinking is when we think outside the box. So we're outside the box and abstract thinking. Another part of the frontal lobe of the brain. Do that with me. Say brain. Do that and say that with me. Brain. Another part that it's responsible for is problem solving. Everyone say problem solving with me. Problem solving. So those are the skills that you need in order to, if a problem arises, how are you going to solve that problem? Another part of the frontal lobe another job is it organizes. Everyone say organizes. Organizes. It does a lot of organizing for us. So think of that as like your file folders, right? We put things in different file folders and we organize that together. Another part of the frontal lobe that it takes care of is the reasoning. Everyone say reasoning with me. Reasoning. So that is when we are trying to make that decision, those all too important decisions, and we're going back and forth. We're reasoning. We're working through that process of deciding what's the best choice. Finally, it is also responsible for regulating emotions. Say that with me. Regulating emotions. So here is a picture of some students, and they are regulating their emotions. They're identifying what emotions they are going through. So let's talk about the frontal lobe functions. Say that with me. Frontal lobe functions. So it has different functions, and one of the functions of our frontal lobe, so again, we're still talking about our frontal lobe, part of the brain, is it helps us to organize. So we talked about reasoning, organizing up here, but it organizes specifically our thoughts on paper. So it helps us to organize our thoughts on paper. It also helps us to remember facts from the teacher. Say facts from the teacher with me. Facts from the teacher. Think about your multiplication facts, right? This is the part of the brain that's remembering, the frontal lobe part of the brain is remembering those facts. It is also responsible for telling stories. So when somebody sits down and tells you a story, that's our frontal lobe part of the brain at work. So here is somebody telling a story. All right, that is the frontal lobe. Now, let's talk about another area of the brain, the temporal lobe. Everyone say that with me. Temporal lobe. Our temporal lobe also has specific purposes. Somewhat like the frontal lobe, it is responsible for our emotions. So happy, sad, angry, mad. It is also where we think about our long-term and our short-term memory. Say long-term and short-term with me. Long-term and short-term. So think about it as we're memorizing things. Our short-term memory is stored, and then we want to move it to long-term memory. It's also responsible for our speech. Everyone say speech. Speech. All right. Finally, let's talk about the functions. Everyone, so when we're talking about the temporal lobe functions, let's try reading that word together. Read that with me. Functions. Very good. It helps us process what the teacher teaches. So this is where all of our processing, think about like a computer processing all the information. This is where our brain does the processing of what the teacher is teaching. So it also helps us to retain facts. Everyone say that with me. Retain facts. And read that with me. Retain facts. Think about, again, our multiplication facts. 8 times 8. This is where that memory retention comes from. And finally, the last function that we're going to talk about is the fight or flight. Everyone say that with me. Fight or flight. This is where our brain decides whether when we're in a situation, whether we're going to fight or work with what we have or take off in that flight. So I want you to turn and talk to a neighbor. We're going to stop for a second. You're going to turn and talk to a neighbor, and you're going to compare and contrast the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. Say that with me. Compare and contrast. Perfect. So you're going to compare and contrast the frontal lobe to the temporal lobe. We're looking for similarities and differences between the two parts of the brain. Ready? Turn and talk.